Welcome to The Debate. Today we're diving into, one of the most significant shifts in modern human life. This profound and frankly rapid transformation of how we interact. It's all driven by, internet-based communication, social media, and certainly the accelerated digitization we saw after the COVID era. The core question before us is pretty fundamental, I think, to the health of our societies. Has modern communication done more to divide us than it has to unite us?
It's a huge question. I mean, the scope of these technologies, it's unlike anything we faced before, isn't it? It's undeniably this incredibly powerful tool for connection. Yet, every day seems to bring new evidence that its application is just fundamentally chaotic, maybe even conflict-ridden.
Exactly. And I'll be arguing that modern communication is primarily a force for fragmentation and division, that it's accelerating polarization and actively eroding the deep social trust that you really need for a healthy society.
And I come at it from a slightly different angle. I maintain that this technology is, on balance, a net force for unity, for global awareness, and, importantly, for empowerment. It connects humanity across boundaries, cultural, geographic, that were previously just impenetrable. The problems we see, I think they're failures of implementation, maybe regulation, not some intrinsic harm baked into the tech itself.
Well, let me begin then by establishing my position. My thesis, essentially, is that modern communication tools fundamentally fragment our attention. They erode empathy and they normalize hostility. Ultimately, this leaves society far more divided. But the key mechanism here, it isn't just bad design. It's, I think, an economic imperative. Algorithms aren't just passively reinforcing pre-existing beliefs. They are designed to maximize time on site. That means they effectively monetize confrontation. Division isn't some unfortunate bug in the system. It's arguably the most profitable feature. We see this polarization in politics, obviously, that's clear, but it extends into genuine intimacy as well. This constant pressure to present a curated, sort of idealized self-image online, it prioritizes what you might call performative interaction, the highlight reel, over real depth. So we're surrounded by maybe thousands of digital connections, yet study after study suggests profound increases in loneliness and social anxiety. Why? Because these connections often lack substance. And furthermore, the prevalence of anonymity and, frankly, unfiltered expression online dramatically lowers accountability. It encourages casual cruelty, destructive trolling, far more often than it fosters constructive dialogue.
Okay, that's a compelling argument, and I see the logic. Though I would frame perhaps the financial incentives a bit differently. While the challenges of algorithms and curation are certainly real, focusing only on the negative ignores the truly transformative power that has, I believe, fundamentally shifted global dynamics for the better in many ways. My core thesis is that modern communication connects humanity, it empowers marginalized voices, and it fosters the global awareness that is absolutely necessary for progress. The evidence for unity, I think, is quite compelling because the internet enables critical cross-cultural exchange, collaboration across continents. It creates a fundamentally more interconnected world. Think about how digital platforms act as channels for liberation, oppressed groups, alternative voices. They can now bypass the traditional gatekeepers, legacy media, restrictive governments, to mobilize collective action, to find solidarity. We've seen this time and time again, haven't we? From huge political movements gaining traction online to niche communities finding a safe haven. And crucially, these digital tools proved vital for societal resilience during crises, like the post-COVID lockdowns. They mitigated profound isolation, they preserved human connection when physical presence was just impossible. These tools fundamentally augment our capacity for connection, giving us both flexibility and, yes, necessary global reach.
I see why you think that. I do. And I don't deny that, individual crises or certain niche groups find utility in these tools. Of course they do. However, we really have to challenge this notion that simply having global platforms equates to genuine global unity. You speak of increased reach, but what's the quality of that connection? The economic reality, as I mentioned, is that users are presented with an illusion of choice. We get trapped in these curated bubbles, these echo chambers of thought that actively discourage or at least don't reward cross-ideological dialogue. This is what some academics call ambient awareness versus true understanding. Connection without mutual understanding is just amplified noise. It fuels greater tribalism, I'd argue, not cohesion. And when outrage is the most effective currency online, the platforms inevitably reward the loudest, often the most extreme voices, pushing the middle ground out entirely.
I acknowledge algorithmic influence is a deeply problematic aspect, particularly, yes, its tendency to maximize emotional engagement over, say, intellectual quality. That's a serious concern. However, the sheer breadth of exposure these global platforms provide still offers, I believe, unprecedented awareness. Before the internet, citizens in any given local area were largely shielded from struggles happening, 5,000 miles away, unless it served the specific narrative interests of those traditional media gatekeepers. Now, individuals are exposed much more directly to diverse voices, international events, global struggles they would likely never encounter otherwise. And even if that exposure is filtered, or partial, or algorithmically skewed, the scope itself forces society to confront problems that were previously invisible, whether that's structural inequalities in one's own city or human rights violations halfway across the world.
That necessary confrontation, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's volatile, is the essential first step, I think, toward a functional global society. To claim it's purely divisive ignores the fact that this visibility is what enables change in the first place.
But does that awareness really translate to genuine change? Or is it often just performative signaling? This brings us, I think, directly to the issue of authenticity and empathy online. We have millions, billions maybe, of people who are aware of seemingly every injustice worldwide. But are we actually more empathetic? Or are we just more tired, more overwhelmed?
Well, I would argue the impact is tangible in many cases. Digital storytelling, viral narratives. They mobilize empathy at scale for global crises, and that can translate directly into action. Think of the flash campaigns for disaster relief or crowdfunding for urgent medical emergencies. These platforms are crucial for raising awareness and generating immediate support for vulnerable groups. Moreover, and this is important, we must not overlook the functional necessity of digital space sometimes. Anonymity, which you characterize as corrosive, well, it can be a necessary protection for whistleblowers, for political dissidents operating under authoritarian regimes, maybe for survivors of abuse. It allows crucial truths to surface that traditional power structures would absolutely suppress. In those high-risk scenarios, anonymity empowers truth-telling.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the, let's say, defensive utility of anonymity in specific high-stakes cases outweighs its daily corrosive effect on general social interactions for the vast majority of people. We need to introduce the distinction between genuine, sustained empathy and, well, performative empathy, or what some people used to call selectivism. Internet activism, the proliferation of hashtags, changing profile filters, it often trivializes suffering, doesn't it? Because it encourages symbolic solidarity without requiring any deep, sustained action or real sacrifice. The result? I think it's generalized compassion fatigue. People are hyper-aware of constant, overwhelming global conflict, which leads many to become numb or cynical rather than truly empathetic. And when anonymity is used, not for the high-minded protection of a dissident, but for just casual malice, for trolling, it normalizes hostility.
It erodes the standards of civilized debate that, frankly, holds society together. The loss of face-to-face cues means empathy and nuance are often replaced by passive-aggressive conflict styles or sometimes just outright cruelty. And that toxicity, inevitably, bleeds back into real-world discourse.
You sound like you're genuinely, well, perhaps nostalgic for a simpler time, a perceived stability that existed before we were all quite so hyper-connected.
I am arguing that pre-internet communication was fundamentally simpler and perhaps more structurally sound in certain ways. It grounded people more deeply in local communities where face-to-face accountability and deep bonds were inherently stronger. That provided a crucial societal stability that I think has now lost to endless digital noise and, critically, to this constant context collapse we experience. Our professional lives, our social lives, our private lives, they constantly bleed into one another online, leaving us, I think, permanently exposed and perpetually performing. When community was primarily physical and local, there was a far greater, a necessary investment in maintaining relationships with substance, simply because you would have to see that person tomorrow.
But hold on a minute. Isn't context collapse just the reality of modern life now? Are you suggesting we need to artificially restrict our audiences, somehow censor parts of our identity simply to feel more stable? I think we need to reframe this nostalgia entirely. Pre-internet society was not inherently healthier. It was simply narrower. It was less self-aware. We tend to romanticize those simpler days, but we conveniently forget that profound structural problems like institutionalized racism, sexism, deep inequality were far easier to ignore precisely because marginalized voices were suppressed by tradition, by gatekeepers. The silence of the pre-digital era wasn't peace, it was often the sound of voices being systematically excluded. The internet didn't create division. I believe it revealed pre-existing structural divisions. It provided the platform for those who were previously silenced to find each other, to organize, and to mobilize. The perception of heightened societal division today might simply be a product of this increased transparency. We are finally being forced to confront the friction that was always there just under the surface. Would you truly argue that ignorance provided a more stable, healthier society than awareness, even if that awareness is painful?
That's an excellent challenge. It is. But visibility isn't always progress. If it only amplifies outrage and tribal warfare without providing any real mechanisms for resolution. And the financial models driving modern platforms, I'd argue, deliberately sabotage resolution. So I maintain that the stability provided by local, accountable community structures is, perhaps, a more crucial ingredient for long-term societal health than the often overwhelming, unfiltered noise of constant global conflict. At the end of the day, the costs of modern communication, the fragmentation from algorithmic echo chambers, the erosion of relationship depth, the acceleration of radicalization within certain countercultures, these, I believe, outweigh the benefits. The technology, as currently deployed through these profit-driven models, fundamentally amplifies division and has frayed the necessary threads of genuine societal fabric. Connection without depth is fundamentally empty.
And I have to disagree that the technology itself is the core problem. I still maintain that the internet provides vital tools for progress, for empowerment, and for global awareness that ultimately overcome these, yes, very real applied flaws. Are there significant problems in how social media platforms are managed? Absolutely. And we must demand better governance, better design. But the underlying technology fundamentally increases connectivity, it informs citizens, and it enables social progress that bypasses traditional, often restrictive structures. We are more interconnected now than at any point in human history. To dismiss this as net harm ignores the safe havens digital tools provide for vulnerable or niche groups. Think of LGBTQ+ youth in isolated rural areas, or people with rare medical conditions who would otherwise be entirely alone.
The internet is empowering. It is democratizing and potentially globally unifying, even if we're still grappling with how to manage its immense power and volatility.
Well, we've clearly established that this whole debate highlights the sheer complexity of the digital age. My argument remains fixed, I suppose, on the erosion of the quality of our relationships in favor of this unmanageable quantity of shallow connections, largely driven by corporate imperatives.
And my position rests on the idea that the core benefit is the monumental leap in visibility and empowerment, especially when compared to the restrictive, sometimes oppressive stability of the past. The ability to connect across borders, to challenge inherited hierarchies, that's a profound net positive in my view.
It seems we might agree, though, that the internet functions less as a primary cause of division and maybe more as an accelerator and perhaps a mirror.
Exactly. A mirror that reflects, sometimes with painful clarity, both our capacity for hostility, for tribalism, but also our tremendous potential for empathy and connection. The challenge for society, then, remains in weighing which side of that highly polished mirror currently dominates our modern social experience.